All right, folks, I'd like to call to order the ad hoc committee on the charter. And I'll be acting as the chair. I have with me Councilor McGinn. Councilor Manning Martin is not here, so I've asked Councilor Melville, and I invite all other councilors to sit down and join us in the discussion of the charter and the process of the charter itself. I'd like to start by reading section 13 of the charter, which is one of my favorite. And we will end this meeting at exactly 7:30 because we want to make sure we start the regular meeting on time because we got a good agenda there. But this section, I think, is worthy. It says more about the charter than anything. Section 13, women qualified to vote and to be candidates for school committee. Women who are qualified to vote for members of the school committee may be candidates for nomination for that office at any preliminary election at which candidates for the same are to be voted for, and at such preliminary election may vote for and only for candidates for nomination thereto. They shall file an above described statement of the candidate and the petition accompanying the statement of the candidate in all cases where the same are hereby required to be filed by male candidates for a nomination to that office. If any section isn't clear as to why we need to review the charter, that one is pretty clear. There are a lot of these types of things within the charter. Our goal this evening is not to read, review, discuss, or any of that. I want to set forth the ground rule tonight. Our role tonight is to learn, in terms of learn what has to be done for us to even open up, review, discuss, and change the charter of the city. And I've asked Mr. Sprzinski to come in and provide us with that education and knowledge, the paths that we're able to travel, to give us some things to ponder. And then as we move forward, we'll start to get into, based on direction, which there are basically two that we can follow, based on direction, we will then, go forward and move to the next step, which is either forming and organizing a charter commission or getting something from there, whatever we have to do. But the goal here this evening is not to really get into the detail. There's been some, a lot of misinformation out there about why we're doing this. I think, I read that section only to help people understand why it's necessary. A lot of people don't even know the charter exists. All they know is when they ask a question, they're responded to, it says, it's in the charter. It's in the charter. It's in the charter. Well, when the charter was formed, I don't think we had any perspective of, where we would be today in terms of technology, in terms of transportation, in terms of organization, in terms of workforce. There was a lot of, it was a different time. So the time is right. And we usually tell, at Greylock, when I have a customer who's embarking on a big system, they'll say, how long is this project going to take? And I usually say, when you call it a project, it has a beginning and an end. Let's say it's a journey, and there'll be some projects along the way. So we're embarking on a journey here. It's not when we did zoning, it was 26 meetings to go through the zoning ordinances and more. It took multiple years. So this is not a short-term thing. We're not going to wave a magic wand and get it fixed. What we're going to do is we're going to listen to what paths we can go down, and then we'll adjourn, and we'll have another meeting where we can ponder those paths and decide what we want to do. Fair enough? Ms. McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm glad you read Section 13. Like yourself, for my wife and my daughters and all other women out there, I find that as offensive as anybody. But I just want to point out that as a practical matter, although it's there, it's against the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so it has no impact whatsoever. And that's true of quite a bit of the language in the charter. So as I just I just want everybody to understand that for all intents and purposes, that language doesn't exist. It's not part of our governing principle of the city of Peabody. And I would submit to you that, or I would request that before we start the journey that you're describing and consider all the alternatives, I think we also need, because I don't think the decision's quite been made yet, that do we want to take this journey? I think that question needs to be answered. Because there, as you point out, there is an awful lot to this. And once we start the journey, there's going to be a lot of time, energy, and effort. And when you are expending time, energy, and effort, you hope to get something for all that. And if in the end all we've done is done some cleanup on some kind of clerical stuff that symbolically feels good but has no true impact, then I'm not sure how much we would have actually accomplished. So I would just ask that on the front end of the process that you described, if we could look at that one key question versus do we really want to start down this path? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate your comment. I don't agree, but I appreciate your comment because there is, there are a lot of publications that are no longer available because of the offensiveness of the publication and the wording in the publication. And to me, the highest belief is I understand totally. I thank you for bringing it up so that others understand it. I certainly understood it before you even brought it up, that Massachusetts general law supersedes anything in this charter, and also that there are provisions within the changes of the ordinance that supersede the language that exists in the charter statement. However, that's never an excuse for not looking at something and not revising something to be consistent with what is currently available. So yes, we'll consider that question in terms of should we, and I'm only one vote. Like anything, it takes the majority of the council to decide whether or not we proceed with that. But clearly the reason I asked for this committee was so that we could go down and really look at what we can do to affect change with this thing, because I don't believe that it should exist in its current form, even though it is superseded by Massachusetts state law. So with that, I'll ask Councilor Smazinski to step up and give us the, what do we have to do to, even if we do consider to go forward, to proceed.
Mr. President, members of the council, thank you for including me in this discussion, which, by all measures is important as it gets in this council chamber. What I want to do is, just first relate back to an opinion that I did at the request of Councilor Gravel back on July 22nd, 2015. That's P32315, and it actually detailed the different options for charter change and amendment. And I'm not going to go through that in terms of all the legal citations. I'm just going to try to summarize it to put everyone in the ballpark, considering it's opening day today, and have an appreciation for the choices that you may have. It's interesting, and I did hear the words of Councilor McGinn in terms of cleaning up things that just may be out of the range of appropriateness. And believe it or not, everyone believes that there's two ways of amending a charter. There's actually three. There's one arcane way that an amendment to minor things can be achieved by a 2/3 vote of the council, concurrence of the mayor. But all of the major issues, length of term, number of elected officials on any board, commission, or council, the method of appointments, those are all excluded from that particular method, and so it's really not used that much. But just by way of a footnote, both Pete and Councilor Gravel, you could use that method to correct, the gender issue if you were so inclined to do it. But I really want to move on to the two other methods of either replacing or amending in substantial part a charter. The second total method, and one of the more well-known ones, is a change that's spearheaded by a charter commission. That's covered by Chapter 43B. It's all laid out in specificity. It starts with a petition, and this is the big thing. I literally have to ring the bell and wake everyone up. This has to start with a petition with 15% of the registered voters being filed with the Board of Election Registrars. So, come on in, the water's fine. Someone's going to collect about 4,500 signatures. File it with the registrars. They have to qualify all the signatories, just like nomination papers, and report that, in fact, to the council that, this number within the proper procedure and format has been achieved. And what happens next is literally the ball drops on the council. The council has to vote for two things to happen simultaneously, and they're counterintuitive. They have to authorize a ballot that does two things. One, it asks the voters of the city of Peabody whether they want to undertake, just like Pete said, they want to undertake this process of charter reform or replacement or amendment. And at the same time, people who want to be on the Charter Commission, because it's an elected Charter Commission, are on that same ballot. And the way it works is, if the measure passes and the majority of the people that vote want to go forward with charter reform, then you take the top 9 vote getters and they become the elected Charter Commission. If the populace says, nope, we do not want to go forward with any type of amendment or change, it's all for naught for those people whose names are on the ballot. Now, in terms of your candidacy, and this, all of the election laws apply, but in general, in a city of our size, which is 50,000 to 100,000, anyone who wants to be nominated to be on the ballot to be part of the elected Charter Commission needs 50 signatures. And again, it goes through the same process with the Board of Election Registrars. And the way they do the ballot, there's no political designation, Republican, Independent, Democrat. It's neutral, and the order is alphabetical by name on the ballot. This process, this vote of the council, and it's a dual vote for both of those things to happen, does not require the concurrence of the mayor. It's solely within the power of the council. And interesting, there's a footnote in the law that says this determination isn't subject to a non-binding referendum. I mean, you may have heard me speak earlier regarding the marijuana issues and make reference to a referendum, a non-binding referendum procedure that's in our code and charter. You can't use that to kind of figure out what the will of the public is. If you're going to do it, you have to do it this way. Now, once you elect a charter commission, and it's 9 members, there are certain, and there's a lot of requirements, but the most significant ones are the timing of the things, the tasks that they need to accomplish. Within the first 45 days, they have to have an organizational meeting. It's like every body, whether it's the board of directors for Babe Ruth baseball to, a federal organization, you have to elect officers, you have to have some sort of rules of order, Robert's Rules of Order. There is actually provisions for funding for a charter committee. It's laid out in the state law that applies. They are required to have a minimum of 2 public hearings. This commission is subject to the open meeting law. It's a body politic. They are required within 16 months of that election, where they were actually assembled and qualified, to have a preliminary report on what they recommend for the changes. It has to be advertised. It has to go to the AG's office. It has to go to the Department of Housing. It's arcane, but it has to. And subject to that review, within 18 months, they have to have a final report and recommendation, again, advertised, AG review, and then it's submitted to the voters. And again, there's another election to determine whether their recommendation ultimately becomes the new charter. That's the second, and in the last 40 years, 88 communities have gone that route. The next way is a change that's spearheaded by a study committee. Now that committee is not proscribed by law, because it ultimately is just designed to create a motion by the council for a home rule amendment to the legislature. And that committee, its composition, timing of tasks, parameters on, whether it's a total review or a limited review of charter provisions, can be created by the council by itself, the mayor, or a combination of the two. And this so-called study committee, it's an advisory committee, goes and does its work. And it can do its work in private, it can be public, it can be mandated by you people if you create it to be public. But ultimately, at some point in time, and there's no time restriction on it, they come back with a recommendation for a charter change or total overhaul, and it's up to the council to vote to send that to the legislature as a home rule petition to be Peabody's new charter. I do note that in contrast to the Charter Commission and the votes necessary by the council to set that process in motion, this vote, there's a vote to send it to the legislature, does need the concurrence of the mayor. And if the legislature and the governor pass and sign the home rule petition, then it comes back to the city, goes on a ballot, and must be ratified by the voters. So those are the 3 tools in your toolbox. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I just, footnote it that there's a whole series of procedural restrictions and conditions associated with all of these processes, and I'm just going to make a command decision and not get into those right now.
Well, thanks. With limited time, I appreciate that. You did mention on the phone that there are groups out there that, for hire, that help to prepare, organize, do a lot of the legwork for it.
Yes, and there's a fellow named McGoldrick. He's with an academic center, and he has been denominated the preeminent expert in charter reform. He, no pride in authorship. I mean, he's the one that creates most of the public publications for the Department of Revenue, the Secretary of State, and he and his group are routinely hired out by communities. Again, we're talking 88 and 63 in the last, 40 years that have gone through it, and the vast majority of them have hired his group to lead them through either one of those 2 processes. And he is out there, and he has the specimen form of government that has become generally accepted, especially, through Mass Municipal Association, Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, and he comes in and he tailors it to the particular community. So that is definitely an option. I saw one agreement, and it was a kind of a blanket agreement for $28,000 to guide the community through the whole process. So that's the type of money that you may be looking at.
Questions from the councilors to our solicitor? Council McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the city solicitor, Mike, where do you draw the line, or who draws the line between minor matters that can be cleaned up through that initial process that you described, and where do you cross over to major issues that need to be handled by one of the other two methods?
Yeah, so specifically in, I believe it's Section 8 of Chapter 43B, it may be Section 9, it's one of the 13. It literally has them set out. And in black and white, they talk of major matters like the term for elected officials, the method of appointment of, department heads. It talks about the number and composition of boards, school committee, city council. But it only has 4 or 5 things in it. And in terms of there's not much case law on it in terms of what may be considered major outside those things that are in writing. So, of course, Pete, what am I going to tell you? It's on a case-by-case basis, and you have to give me the facts, and I got to go research it, and then I got to come back and confuse the hell out of you.
I appreciate the honesty. Well, I mean, we got a handout here that indicated kind of the 3 biggies, let's call them, reasons why you might go down this road, and they tend to fall in line with what you just described, which is if you're going to make changes to the legislative body, if you're going to make changes to the chief executive, and then centralization versus dispersion of authority, so how boards and commissions are appointed or elected, that type of thing. Those seem to fall into the major category, and then everything else might seem to be fair game for the option 1 route. But I know you can't answer that directly without more information.
I just want to stop with you agreeing with me and then go home,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know how to top that one. Councilor Melville, any other councilor questions? Yes.
Through the chair. For the third option that you had laid out, the other 2 options is multiple stopgaps, just like any kind of major change along the way. The third, it seems that we've got a lot of leeway on how that would be organized and operated. Essentially, it would be an act of either the council or the mayor to slow that process down, correct? Which would be the study, I'm calling it the study group option.
That's open field running at its best. You're gonna, there's the potential of this body, the mayor, or both of you setting a committee off and then just literally shagging that fly ball on the council chamber floor when it all comes back. And the question is, and it's literally going to come back to this body, do we or don't we send it into the legislature? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's grabbing mercury on the tabletop. That's going to squirt out all over the place.
through the chair. Because, okay, yeah, it does answer my question. Essentially, we would be setting our own review process that would ultimately go to the legislature for the home rule petition, is really what I'm getting at. And then, okay, very good, thank you.
Council Sasslaw?
Thank you. And thanks for taking the time to explain that to us, Councilor. When I hear it initially, I guess what I think right off the bat is I look at number one, because I like the words openness, transparency, open meeting law, and things of that nature. A couple of questions on that. You talked about petition, 4,500 signatures, an election. I would assume that we would probably want to do that. We could do that anytime, but in the interest of being fiscally responsible, we would probably want to do it when there is an election going on, although it can be done on its own. Is that correct?
And, you know, the economies of this really argue for, you know, timing it simultaneous with one of your elections.
Sure. And then my other question was, so let's assume that we go down that road and we put it on a ballot, and whether it be 2018 or 2019, my next question is, if the community approved it, and you have those top 9, that charter commission, who now is the commission, the one thing that I'm having a little bit of a disconnect on is, so we've established a subcommittee charter commission. Would we do work parallel to them and then as a body make recommendations, or does that 9 people do their own work and then we literally as councilors just show up as citizens? And Dave's nodding his head, so I'm seeing the answer, I think. So would that be it?
Charter Commission is the one that has the power.
Okay. So,
And you know, you're not banned from being participatory, but, you know, they're their own, you know, mind, and they're going to give their own value judgments.
Right.
You don't have any supervisory or, you know, superior power over them in the chain of command.
sure. And then they would, I assume they would elect a chairperson who would run the meetings and schedule the meetings and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so that's one of the mandates. Within 45 days of being elected, they have to have an organizational meeting and, again, organize themselves, president, vice president, clerk, you know, all those things, you know, attendant to, you know, running a committee, and financing is part of it, you know, how it's going to happen. There's an elaborate section in there on how they can actually accept donations for the purpose of doing it. But I didn't want to get into those,
Okay.
that minutia.
So, and thank you. So now I'm going to ask the chair, where obviously you've given this some thought over the last 2 or 3 years. Do you care at this point to share? Because, you know, some of the issues that I brought up, your point of view, or do you have any thoughts on it, or if you feel you need to wait? But you've thought about this a lot more than I think many people in the room.
No, what I've thought is that what Councilman McGinn brought up in the beginning, which is, you know, does the council have the fortitude that it wants to go forward to look at these issues, is the first important piece. But that's augmented by, does the mayor have the fortitude to want to go forward? Cleaning up the language, that was a kind of a new option I heard tonight. We can clean up some of the language. That's good. I'm glad we now know that. But you know, the referendum puts it on a long-term track, but it also puts it on the most democratic track as far as getting the consensus of the city. If you don't get 15, you know, if you don't get the bulk of the city to vote in favor of doing it, then you're not doing it anyway. So you've heard from the people, they don't care, and you just table it and leave it alone. So I think from my perspective, the next step really for this ad hoc committee is to hear the wishes of, I think we should start with the mayor, and then the wishes of the council as a whole. And if there's a lot of forward momentum and people want to take this on, then I think we make the decision of either, I don't think option 3 is mutually exclusive. I mean, we could be doing option 3 anytime we want, it sounds like, which is going in and cleaning up the language. It would then be whether option 1 or option 2 is the selection. Do you go to the home rule petition, which kind of keeps it more confined and may shorten the time frame, or do you go to the ballot and the charter committee position, and that lengthens the time frame but opens up and makes it more transparent? So I think there's some stuff to think about. I don't think we need to make a decision tonight. Again, my only goal this evening was to get everybody on the same page. I think we are, our body is the legislative body of the city, as defined in the charter. And it's our responsibility to maintain the ordinances and to ensure that things are consistently applied, et cetera. So I think there's a real need for some thinking about it and coming back and then making some decisions as to what track we want to take, if any. And I'll clue that in as if any, because I don't disagree that that's a decision to be made.
And I just had one follow-up. The people who run, is it open to current elected officials also, or just private citizens? How does that procedure work, Mike? Could the mayor, could a city council, could a school committee light commissioner, can they run?
When I was driving here, I actually was thinking about that. And I have to tell you, I said, maybe, I wonder if there's a decision one way or the other on that relative to, at least an ethics commission, advisory opinion, because we've got 140 communities that have gone through the process. So I don't know the answer, but here's the analogy that I would draw. You people actually have the power under the third total option, the second major option, to appoint a committee of yourselves to be that advisory committee. So if you could participate that way, I'm not sure you're excluded from actually getting the 50 names and running for that particular position. So, but I'll endeavor to get an answer on that one.
Councilor Mitsoulas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a member of this committee, but curiosity brought me here. And before I got here, this week I read this charter here, and it was mind-boggling. To think back in 1916, you had minds that put something like this together. It almost kind of reminded me of the Constitution. How'd they ever put that together? And I give them praise and credit. But there was something that caught my interest, and I'll tell you one of the things. I listened to what you were saying, Mr. Chairman, that and what Councilman again also said, this is something we're looking into. We don't know if we're going to go forward. It's something we're all going to have to agree on. And we didn't pick out any specific section that we want to work on, and eventually that's going to happen. But I'll tell you what my concern was. I think this charter was put together great. I think the Constitution, absolutely great. Our zoning, great. The minds that went behind this years ago knew what they were doing for the future of this city. Now, one of the things that I worry about, but you kind of assured me this is not going to happen, that we take something and change it because it's almost impossible to reverse it and bring it back. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. In the year 2000, there was a zoning change made in my ward that created 500 housing units. And this was around the time that I think the city realized, hey, there was a mistake made here, and you all got together, and it took you years to bring the zoning back to what it should be, and these are the things that I worry about. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen here. You follow what I'm saying? I'm only saying I want to bring this to our attention so that it doesn't happen. And, Mr. Chairman, I guess that basically is, is my concern. And I'm sure that this body will do the right thing. But I wanted my feeling known. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Souza. Councilman McGinn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, I think we were referring to the options in a different order, so I was referring to them in the order that the solicitor explained them to us. So your option 3 is my option 1, right? I think there's a lot of appeal to option 1. We could clean up a lot of the offensive language in here that's and deal with a lot of the issues that have been raised with little effort. And you also made the comment with which I agree, that they're not mutually exclusive. So I think my suggestion would be that we continue to meet as a committee and mark up those minor issues with the intent of addressing that as a council. And then when we have that product, make a determination can be made, is this sufficient for what we hope to set out to do, versus taking it to one of the other 2 alternatives, which are dramatically larger undertakings. So that would be my suggestion in terms of how this committee moves forward, and I think we could get to a cleanup result relatively quickly, which is probably something that would be of interest to you, since I know you're action-oriented. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any further questions or comments? You guys are beautiful tonight. It's 7:25. I appreciate you all coming. There'll be a report of progress, and then we'll schedule another meeting and discuss next actions. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.